So the first thing you're going to do is just use that Phillips screwdriver that's up on the board there. And there's two screws, one on the top left and one on the top right. And that's all that's holding in this plastic cover. Okay. I always put the screws back in this tool tray, okay, because I don't want to lose them. These particular screws will stay in this plastic cover, okay, but take them out anyway, okay, that way you don't lose them. And that's all that's holding this on, okay. Just pull off. You've got the starter cord pulled through the back, just pop that through and take this off, okay. So that exposes what's called the shroud, okay. We'll be taking that off in just a second, but before we can take the shroud off, we want to take off our plastic fuel tank. So there's 3 bolts that hold it on the top, one here, one here, one here, okay. They're 5/16, so you're just going to use a 5/16 socket. You won't be able to get down in there with your 5/16 wrench, okay, so you got to make sure you use a socket on those. I like to use this extension, okay, just to get down in there a little bit. Otherwise, it's a little too close. All right. So I'll put that on my 5/16 socket. Again, I always double check to make sure I'm going the right way. Put that on there, and then once they're loose, I'll actually just use the extension. Okay. I'll take this off a lot, you'll see, and almost use it like a nut driver just to loosen these up. And then carefully pull that off. These are small, so don't lose those. Another one here. Okay. Now, there's also another bolt down on the bottom holding the gas tank on the bottom side. That's a 3/8. So I'm going to take my 5/16 off, put the 3/8 on, back on my ratchet here. Double check my position, and again I'll just break this one free, take off the extension, and then use that like a nut driver. Okay, so I'll back this one out. Now what you'll also find in between your gas tank and the crankcase here is this black plastic spacer. Okay, basically this fuel tank won't sit on here quite right. Okay, if it's flush with the top, you'll notice there's a little bit of a gap back here. So that spacer needs to go in between that gap. All right. So take a look at your engine when you start the lab and find out where that spacer is. Okay. So that just goes like that. Don't lose those. Now your fuel tank's ready to come off. You could remove it from the fuel line. I don't. Okay, because there's probably fuel in the fuel line. Maybe there's residual gas left in your tank from the previous lab. So I just kind of let it hang off to the side, okay? All right, now the next thing that needs to come off is your oil fill. And your oil fill is just held on by one 5/16 bolt, okay? Same type of bolt that is on your, that's holding your fuel tank on. So I'll switch this out, back to 5/16, back to my ratchet, double check my direction, and then loosen that up. Again, once I get it broke free, I can pretty much use this like a nut driver. And a little bit more. And then this should just kind of wiggle out. Okay? It's got a little, a little hook here that'll hook into the shroud and help keep it in place. Otherwise, it's just held in by the one bolt. Okay, keep that safe. Put your oil fill somewhere else where you won't lose it. And now we can remove the shroud. Okay, shroud. This is a piece that serves a couple of main functions. Number one, it holds our starter. Okay, this is riveted right on there. Okay, can't take that off. That'll come off with the shroud. So the shroud holds our starter. It protects your engine. Okay, so underneath here we'll have our flywheel spinning around. So rocks, dirt, dust, debris. Okay, it keeps stuff out of our engine. What it also does is it helps cool our engine. Okay, by directing air around our engine and not just out up into the atmosphere. Okay. If I were to grab a flywheel here, you can see that it has these fins or these blades on it that kind of act as fan blades as it's spinning. Well, all that air kind of moves around your shroud, and then it directs it around the engine to help cool, okay? So your shroud does three things. Holds the starter, helps protect it, and it helps aid in cooling by keeping the air blowing around the engine itself, okay? All right, taking this off, pretty simple. 4 bolts, 2 in the rear, all right? And then, got my fuel tank in the way here. 2 more in the front. Okay, so I'll take those off. Switch out to a 3/8 because it's... And then again, taking off the 2 back ones. I just loosen them up, and then I'll finish those off by hand there. 2 in the front, right here. Right here. Okay, pull this off, and then I'll use this like a nut driver again. Keep that safe. Keep that safe. 2 in the back, just walking those up. Another one back here. Keep that safe. Okay, after you've got those 4 bolts out, your shroud should just lift off. You notice that it's a little stuck to the magnet on the flywheel, okay? But that'll just pull right out of there. Okay, so that brings us to kind of the final steps here, which is to remove the flywheel. So what we've got in here is we've got a flywheel nut, okay? It is bolted onto the end of the magneto end of the crankshaft. Underneath it is your starter cup, okay? And then underneath that is your flywheel. Once I take off this starter cup, I'll kind of show you how this works with the starter that's on the underside of our shroud. Okay. So this is where our new tools come into play. Okay? If I were to take my breaker bar, again, this flywheel nut is tight, and I were to put this on here, again, I'm spinning it to the left, it just moves the whole flywheel. So I've got to have some way to keep this flywheel steady while I break free that flywheel nut. Okay? So that's where we use the strap wrench. Now, you want to look for a spot on the flywheel that there's no guards, nothing else is in the way. Okay? So I generally look towards the back. That's where I want my curved portion of my strap wrench to go. Okay? So if I put the curved portion there, now I'm just hitting flywheel, right? I'm not up on these fins, okay? I'm not on any guards. I'm not on anything else. I'm not, putting pressure on my governor underneath here. I just want to be able to hold this steady, okay? Also, stay in the middle of it. Okay? You won't want to be too high, you don't want to be too low. And you want this in your right hand. Okay? If I'm going to loosen this, I need the breaker bar in my left hand so that I can go to the left, right? Another thing that sometimes the first time you're doing this, you make the mistake of being too wide. Okay, I'm not really strong out here, right? I'm way too wide, so I want to bring this in a little closer. Okay, now I can use my strength and my weight to my advantage and pinch these two together to break that flywheel nut free. Pay attention to the angle of this. Some people want to lay it down, lift it up. You want to keep both of these parallel to the ground and parallel to each other so that when you squeeze them together, that will pop off, okay? Once it breaks free, you don't really need the breaker bar anymore. Don't really need the strap wrench anymore. You can just reach in and back off the flywheel nut. Okay, looks like that. Keep that in a safe place, and then you can remove the starter cup. Okay. All right, so the starter cup looks like this. You can see the ridges on the inside. Here's how this works. So you've got this starter, and if I were to pull this, take a look at the little white kind of jaws that come out as I pull. Notice how as I pull out, the jaws come out. When I release, they're spring loaded, so they go back in. So as I pull, those two white jaws or teeth or whatever you want to call them, they extend out and they grab onto the ridges on the inside of this cup and then spin it. And then when I let go of the recoil starter, they slip back around the other side. Okay? So that's why we have this on there. Now, put that in a safe spot. So my flywheel won't come off right now. It's been pressed on there tight from the last person that put this on. Okay? I also have this brake. Remember we talked about the flywheel brake when we were talking about starting our engines? Okay? So that's putting pressure on it. I may also have pressure from the magnets. Okay? Magnets on the side of our flywheel. If they happen to be towards this magneto here, which we'll get to in a later lesson, it could want to attract it to that. So I try to look for the magnet, set that away from the magneto. You're going to pull back on your flywheel brake, and that's where you use your dead blow hammer to kind of knock this loose. I generally go kind of in a north, south, east, west pattern on this, and to tell if it's loose, you can look at it, but a lot of times you can go off of sound. Okay, and don't be afraid to give this thing a tap, all right? That's not going to cut it. Okay, you've got to release it. Okay, so I just kind of saw it wiggle a little bit, so I know it's broken free. Again, I was pulling back on that brake. Okay, so now this should come straight off. There's your flywheel. You can't forget the flywheel key. Okay, so you've got the keyway on your crankshaft. You've got the keyway on the inside of your flywheel. Okay, your key, your flywheel key, makes sure that your flywheel and your crankshaft spin together. If I put this back on with no flywheel key and I try to start my engine, all I'm going to be doing is spinning my flywheel, not the crankshaft, which means my piston isn't spinning. Your engine's not going to work. Okay? So once you've removed the flywheel key, you've got that in a safe place. It's small. Don't lose it. You are halfway done with your lab. Okay? That's the full disassembly for the Flywheel Lab. Okay?